What if I told you that the Australian political establishment is about to face its most uncomfortable reckoning in decades? The numbers that dropped this week should terrify every major party strategist in Canberra. What we're witnessing isn't just a polling fluctuation, it's a fundamental realignment. And by the time you finish watching, you'll understand why the next election might look nothing like anything Australia has experienced in modern history. The bombshell. Redbridge polling shows One Nation at 18% nationally. The Greens sit at 9%. One Nation has literally doubled the Greens' support. This isn't some fringe outlier. Redbridge is one of Australia's most respected operations, second only to Newspoll. When numbers like this emerge, dismissing them as noise becomes impossible. But here's where it gets genuinely fascinating. The age breakdown completely demolishes the lazy narrative that One Nation draws exclusively from older voters, who'll eventually age out. Among younger voters, One Nation sits at 18%. Generation X, that sandwich generation drowning in mortgage stress, backs One Nation at 20%, just 6 points behind the Liberal Party. Among baby boomers, 24% for One Nation, 30% for the Liberals. This isn't a retirement community protest vote. This is cross-generational movement spanning the electorate in ways that should terrify the majors. And wait, because the story gets more intriguing when you examine the policies driving this surge. We're constantly told voters don't care about policy details, that elections are won on vibes and personality. Yet One Nation has built a comprehensive platform directly addressing the material concerns keeping families awake at night. Their joint income tax filing proposal allows couples with dependents to combine incomes and split the total for taxation. Picture a household where one partner earns $50,000, the other $100,000. Currently, that higher earner pays tax on the full amount. Under One Nation's plan, combined to $150,000, split to $75,000 each, both taxed at that lower rate. The tax-free threshold kicks in twice. That family suddenly has significantly more money each year. This is kitchen table economics resonating with people genuinely struggling, choosing between electricity bills and adequate groceries. They're proposing constitutional protections for free speech, not implied rights judges occasionally acknowledge, but actual, hard-coded constitutional guarantees. Restrictions on foreign ownership of essential infrastructure. Education reform prioritizing critical thinking over what they call guilt-based curriculum. Whether you agree is beside the point. They've done the homework. They've built coherent policy frameworks speaking to concerns the majors seem determined to ignore. Senator Pauline Hanson articulated something the establishment would prefer remained unsaid. She spoke about feeling shifts when she's out in public, people expressing exhaustion with the current trajectory. They want change. They want their country back. They're frustrated by mass migration's impact on housing and rentals. They're drowning under cost of living pressures. Most critically, they've lost faith in the major parties' ability to address these concerns. The polling bears this out alarmingly. When respondents were asked which party they trusted most on immigration, given they considered it their top issue, 27% said One Nation. Labor second at 20%, Coalition third at 19%. The Liberal National Coalition, traditionally the natural home for border security concerns, now runs third on the very issue that once defined their appeal. This isn't just a problem. This is existential crisis territory. The immigration numbers get starker. In a Sydney Morning Herald poll, 58% said Australia's current net migration intake of 316,000 is too high. In New South Wales, when asked if immigration has been net positive or negative for people like them, 24% said positive, 24% neutral, 44% negative. Nearly half view immigration negatively. And before anyone characterizes this as xenophobia, the data suggests something more material. People connect immigration to their inability to find housing, to strained public services from ambulances to hospitals. The historical context strikes harder. 30 years ago, Australia had 18 million people. Today, 28 million. In another 30 years, projections suggest mid-40s. That's extraordinary growth for a developed nation. While beneficial for tax bases and government revenue, it's creating genuine quality of life concerns for everyone in various queues. The question isn't whether this concern is legitimate. The question is why major parties seem incapable of acknowledging it. Now, here's where analysis gets granular about voter priorities, because strategic mistakes become blindingly obvious. The same poll asked respondents to rank top issues. Cost of living came in at 75%, healthcare 39%, housing affordability 35%, crime and public safety 29%, immigration 26%, economic management 15%. Way down at the bottom, climate change at 13%. Think about the political oxygen consumed over 6 months by the coalition's internal warfare over net zero emissions. Week after week, month after month, the dominant narrative was about abandoning, modifying, or maintaining net zero commitments. Members resigned, factions battled, media breathlessly covered every twist. All this energy, all this capital, focused on an issue that 13% rank as top priority. Meanwhile, 75% say cost of living is their primary concern, and labor leads the coalition 30-21 on handling it. Let me be clear, this isn't about whether climate change is real or net zero is good policy. This is about political strategy and electoral mathematics. If you're in opposition at 24% primary vote after devastating loss, you have limited capital to spend. Every issue you fight on represents opportunity cost. When data shows 3/4 care most about cost of living, while 13% rank climate change top priority, the strategic calculation seems straightforward. Yet the coalition spent months locked in combat over the 7th-ranked issue, while ceding ground on 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. This brings us to uncomfortable reality opposition parties struggle accepting. Elections aren't won by having right positions on every issue by some abstract standard. Elections are won by understanding which issues voters actually care about and offering credible solutions. Retail politics at its most fundamental. You go where customers are, offer what they're looking for, build trust by demonstrating you understand their concerns. So, what might that look like? Some strategic speculation. On housing, why not consider restricting negative gearing for investors holding multiple properties? Not eliminating it entirely, not touching mom and dad investors with 1 or 2 properties, but limiting those with 3, 4, 5, or more. Redirect that revenue into enhanced first homebuyer schemes. This directly addresses primary concerns while being targeted enough to avoid alienating most property owners. On healthcare, the second highest concern, why not propose expanding pharmaceutical benefits with additional subsidized medications? Increase pressure on insurance companies to cover more procedures. Make denying legitimate claims harder? On cost of living, consider proposing household asset write-off, similar to small business instant asset write-off. Allow individuals earning up to $100,000 to write off up to $10,000 in household purchases, like replacing white goods, furniture, essential items. Not renovations or luxury purchases, but basic material goods families need. This provides immediate relief while stimulating consumer spending precisely where needed. These aren't perfect policies. They'd need detailed costing, implementation strategies, consideration of unintended consequences. But they speak directly to concerns 75% identify as top priority. They're kitchen table economics in the most literal sense. Critically, they're policies that could potentially peel away some of that 18% who've drifted to One Nation, because they see it as the only party willing to address material concerns, rather than engaging in ideological warfare over issues they don't care much about. But here's the twist making this fascinating. The numbers suggest this isn't protest vote that will dissipate. This might be something more durable, more structural. One Nation's previous result was around 6%, delivering 3 Senate seats. Now they're polling 18. Even if that falls significantly, even if they only end up with 12 or 13%, that's still double their previous result. In Australia's preferential voting with Senate proportional representation, that translates into serious political power. Senator Hanson has been underestimated for multiple generations. Every cycle, commentators confidently predict her party's demise. every cycle, she persists. She's tapped into something genuine, a sense that major parties have become so consumed with internal warfare, so focused on poorly polling issues, so beholden to interest groups not reflecting mainstream concerns, that they've created a vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum. The energy sector provides perfect case study. Australia's major energy companies recently warned electricity prices unlikely to fall for at least a decade. One chief executive warned storms are coming around cost and competitiveness. The cost of network infrastructure, poles and wires, set to increase substantially. This is transition cost, quietly acknowledged in industry for years, but never honestly entering political rhetoric. Generating electricity may cost less with renewables in some scenarios, but delivering it through maintaining and upgrading networks continues rising. This is rewiring the nation. Reality for two-way power flows from distributed generation, rather than one-way flows from centralized coal-fired stations. Here's the political paradox keeping you engaged. At the last election, the now Prime Minister promised his policies would deliver $275 reductions on household power bills. Not only did this not happen, bills actually increased substantially over 3 years. By any normal accountability standard, this should have been electoral disaster. Voters were promised something specific, measurable, material. They received the opposite. Political science textbooks suggest this should result in electoral punishment. Instead, Labor won. So the question becomes, are power prices actually as politically salient as the opposition hopes? This brings us to broader questions of government spending and priorities, circling back to why voters are frustrated with the establishment. Consider the First Nations ambassador, whose contract was extended with salary increase to $400,000 yearly, more than a backbencher earns. In the first 20 months, overseas travel exceeded $250,000. 3 trips to Switzerland, 5 to the United States, multiple Pacific visits. Whether you support the position or not, this is substantial taxpayer expenditure when voters say cost of living is their overwhelming priority. Or consider pursuing COP31 hosting in Adelaide. Estimates suggest $750 million to $2 billion. For a conference the Prime Minister hasn't attended in other countries for 3 years. An event so important, Australia must spend potentially billions hosting it, yet not important enough for the Prime Minister to attend when someone else pays. The Foreign Minister, when asked about cost, declined specifics, saying they haven't won the bid yet. But they're bidding. They're committing political capital. And they can't or won't tell taxpayers what it costs. The justification was particularly striking. The primary reason for bidding was bringing world attention to Pacific climate change effects, highlighting lived reality in countries like Tuvalu and Vanuatu. Setting aside whether spending $1 billion to host a conference in Adelaide most effectively draws attention to Pacific concerns, there's something almost patronizing about the underlying assumption. Leaders from Tuvalu and Vanuatu attend these conferences yearly, wherever held. They present concerns directly to assembled world leaders. The idea their message can only be heard if the conference happens in Adelaide rather than Brazil or Turkey profoundly misunderstands how these events function. Meanwhile, during sitting weeks, government members film social media content, drawing houses on radio shows, doing yoga poses for cameras, creating content rolled out strategically when Parliament isn't sitting. There's an argument politicians need to communicate where voters are, increasingly meaning social media and informal content. But there's something deeply off-putting about watching elected officials engage in performative exercises while polling shows 3/4 genuinely struggling with cost of living, unable to find affordable housing, feeling the political class is fundamentally disconnected from their reality. This environment fuels One Nation's rise. It's not primarily about Pauline Hanson's charisma, though that plays a role. It's not sophisticated campaigns or exceptional ground game, though the party has improved. It's fundamentally about growing perception among significant electorate slices that major parties play a different game than voters care about. That Labour and Coalition are locked in battles over 7th-ranked issues, while 1st, 2nd, and 3rd get treated as afterthoughts or addressed only with cautious, incremental, focus-grouped non-solutions. The trajectory becomes genuinely unpredictable, making this moment politically significant. If one nation maintains even half this polling through the next election, they'll have unprecedented Senate influence and potentially balance of power. If major parties, particularly the coalition most likely to lose votes to one nation, don't develop credible responses to issues driving voters toward minors, we could see fundamental fragmentation, making every future government dependent on complex multi-party negotiations. The coalition faces particularly acute dilemma. They're hemorrhaging support to one nation on their right flank, while simultaneously trying to appeal to moderate suburban voters who might switch from Labor. These groups often want incompatible things. Voters drifting to one nation want harder immigration lines, aggressive cultural positions, less climate concern. Suburban moderates want cost of living and housing action, but aren't necessarily receptive to hardline immigration or culture war positions. Threading this needle requires extraordinary political skill and probably luck. Labor, meanwhile, sits relatively pretty short-term, but should be deeply concerned medium and long-term. Yes, they're ahead. Yes, they lead on most issues, including critical cost of living. But they're governing, where minor parties collectively pull nearly 30%, combining One Nation and Greens. That's extraordinary major party dissatisfaction. While Labor might benefit from coalition weakness now, there's no guarantee that remains stable. Governments inevitably accumulate baggage. Promises go unfulfilled, economic headwinds emerge. When that happens, if voters have developed the habit of looking to minors as viable alternatives, Labor could face the same erosion currently plaguing the coalition. What we're witnessing is a stress test of Australian democracy's capacity to respond to voter concerns. Major parties have dominated for generations, but that dominance has always been contingent on convincing voters they offer meaningfully different visions, and one represents the best available option. When voters stop believing that, when they conclude both majors essentially play the same game with slightly different rhetoric, that's when minors find their opening. One Nation's surge might not fully translate to election results. Polling 18 doesn't guarantee receiving 18. People tell pollsters one thing and do another in voting booths. Majors have extensive ground game, massive advertising budgets, decades of institutional campaign knowledge. They have advantages minors can't easily replicate. But even if One Nation's actual vote comes in at 12 or 13 rather than 18, that still represents doubling their previous result and significant landscape shift. The age breakdown is perhaps the most significant finding. If this were purely generational, concentrated among older voters who will age out, majors could simply wait. But double-digit support across every cohort, from young voters through Gen X to baby boomers, suggests something more fundamental. The concerns driving people toward One Nation transcend generational divides and reflect something deeper about how Australians across age spectrum experience contemporary life. Cost of living pressures, housing affordability crisis, sense that immigration levels contribute to infrastructure strain and reduced quality of life. These aren't age-specific. They're universal concerns, hitting different generations differently, but with similar intensity. The path forward depends largely on whether majors can recognize what's happening and adapt. Do they continue fighting battles over issues 13% rank top priority, while 75% say cost of living is primary? Do they continue assuming One Nation's support is soft and will evaporate? Do they continue governing as though the 2026 electorate looks fundamentally similar to 2006 or 1996? Or do they recognize something has shifted, that voter priorities evolved, that old playbooks might not work, and that credibility requires actually addressing issues voters say they care about most, rather than issues political insiders think voters should care about? This is the fundamental test facing Australian democracy now. Can majors adapt quickly enough to recapture confidence of voters who've drifted to minors? Or will we see continued fragmentation, making stable majority government increasingly difficult, forcing Australia toward more European-style multi-party system, where coalition building becomes norm rather than exception? The answer will determine not just who wins the next election, but what Australian politics looks like for the next generation. And based on these numbers, that answer is far from certain.